Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are looking at something truly monumental. We're going to walk through a massive enterprise transformation, literally picking up a sprawling, incredibly complex SAP workload and moving it straight into the Microsoft Azure Cloud. Now, if you're an infrastructure engineer, a basis consultant, or an IT leader, you already know this is definitely not some basic copy and paste job. Oh no, this is essentially a high-stakes heart transplant for a company's entire digital operation. So let's dive right into this narrative.
Here is the defining question of our story. How exactly do you move 5,000 SAP users to the cloud with near zero downtime? We are talking about upgrading from a legacy SAP ECC system running on Oracle, all the way up to a modern S/4 HANA environment on Azure. And here's the kicker. We have to do it without turning off the lights on the business. This is the ultimate test of cloud architecture, rock-solid networking, and a hyper-precise migration strategy.
All right, let's set the stage with Section 1, the on-premise dilemma. To really understand the solution here, we first need to look at the inciting incident. 5,000. I really want you to pause and think about that number for a second. That is 5,000 real people whose daily jobs, critical transactions, and overall productivity depend entirely on this one SAP system. I mean, if the system lags, 5,000 people sit idle. If the system crashes, the entire company practically grinds to a halt. And at the start of our story, they were relying on two aging, rigid, physical data centers. The hardware was completely maxed out, and the infrastructure had become incredibly brittle. It's a stark contrast when you compare the two worlds. On one hand, you have this on-premise reality, severe hardware bottlenecks, those endless, agonizing procurement cycles for new servers, and just a constant underlying fear of maxing out capacity. But then, you look at the Azure Cloud. You get instant agility, massive scale, and that deep, built-in partnership between Microsoft and SAP that provides certified environments, basically ready to go. The enterprise knew. Without a doubt, they had to make the leap to survive and grow. Moving right along to Section 2, Designing the Cloud Blueprint. You know, you don't just jump into the cloud blindly. You absolutely need a map. The crucial point here is figuring out exactly where each piece of that massive SAP puzzle is going to live in Azure. It's about translating physical hardware to cloud services brilliantly. So, our central services? Those route through an Azure load balancer for high availability. For the application servers, we match them up with Azure's E-Series virtual machines. And for the massive memory demands of the SAP HANA database itself, we bring in the heavy hitters, leveraging the powerhouse M-Series VMs. And to make sure those 5,000 users never experience even a millisecond of lag in their SAP GUI, we back the whole shebang with premium and ultra SSD managed disks. It guarantees maximum throughput and IOPS. Of course, none of those incredibly powerful servers matter at all if the users can't reach them securely. And that brings us to the Azure Network Architecture. We naturally isolate the environments using virtual networks and highly specific subnets, but the real hero of this part of the story is ExpressRoute. Think of ExpressRoute as a dedicated, high-speed, private tunnel connecting the company's physical offices directly to the Azure environment. It completely bypasses the unpredictable public internet, and it's shielded by network security groups, ensuring traffic flows smoothly and, above all, safely. Okay, Section 3, Executing the Migration Journey. So, we have our blueprint, the architecture is approved, now the energy really shifts into technical execution. It's a fast-paced, beautifully orchestrated process. First, we provision the Azure VMs. Boom! Then, we lay down the Linux operating system. Next up, we configure the networking, the DNS, and time synchronization. Finally, we install the SAP kernel and the HANA database. Thanks to Azure's automation capabilities, what literally used to take weeks of racking and stacking physical servers in a freezing cold data center, well, now it takes a fraction of the time. But how do we actually move the massive mountain of data without stopping the business? This is where we need to slow down for a second and talk about a piece of absolute magic. DMO, the database migration option. This tool right here is the secret sauce to achieving that coveted near-zero downtime. It actually allows us to update the SAP software and migrate the database from legacy Oracle over to SAP HANA simultaneously. It all happens behind the scenes, while users are literally still working in the old system. Incredible, right? And while this migration is humming along in the background, the Basis Administrator is constantly checking the pulse of the system. If you're in the SAP world, you know these transaction codes are your daily reality. We use SM50 to monitor the active work processes, just making absolutely sure the system isn't choking. And we rely heavily on STMS, the transport management system, to guarantee all our critical configurations are moving safely from the development sandbox all the way up the chain to the new production environment.
Which brings us to Section 4, bulletproofing the landscape.
We've built it. We've migrated it. Now, we must protect it. We achieve high availability using pacemaker clusters, which honestly, you can think of like a highly coordinated relay race. We deploy our SAP components across different Azure availability zones. So if one application node trips and falls, let's say a server requires an unexpected reboot, the pacemaker cluster instantly passes the baton. The workload fails over to a healthy node so fast that our 5,000 users barely even notice a hiccup.
But what if a much larger disaster strikes? This is where we define the true, concrete stakes of business continuity with two critical metrics, RPO and RTO. RPO, or Recovery Point Objective, is your maximum acceptable data loss. RTO, or Recovery Time Objective, is your maximum acceptable downtime. By implementing Azure Site Recovery, we can continuously replicate our data across entire regions. So during our DR drills, we actually prove that even if a whole region goes dark, we can spin up the SAP Landscape in a secondary region, easily meeting our RTO and keeping the business alive.
And guarding all of this is what we call the Azure Security Shield. We definitely aren't just relying on old-school perimeter firewalls anymore. We manage those 5,000 unique user identities seamlessly with Microsoft Entra ID, which you might know as Azure AD. We enforce strict role-based access control so administrators only have the permissions they absolutely positively need. And we lock down our certificates and encryption keys inside the impenetrable Azure Key Vault. It's a multi-layered fortress for sure.
Finally, let's explore Section 5, the future of SAP operations.
The migration is complete. The system is secure. So what does day-to-day administration actually look like in this new cloud frontier? Well, if you've ever worked in IT, you know the legendary caffeine-fueled stress of an on-premise system refresh weekend. Copying data, manual patching, just praying the hardware holds up. Well, compare that nightmare to the modern Azure automation framework. With tools like Azure Update Manager and Infrastructure as Code, those grueling weekends are pretty much a thing of the past. Routine maintenance, kernel upgrades, patching, it's all scheduled, automated, and practically stress-free. And keeping an eye on the health of the system has never been easier. We integrate SAP Cloud ALM directly with Azure Monitor to create a unified, real-time dashboard. No more scrambling to guess why the system is acting slow. We can instantly visualize our targets, CPU, memory, disk throughput, network latency, and even deep HANA database metrics, all in one single pane of glass. It completely empowers the Basis administrators to proactively solve issues long before the end users ever feel them.
Ultimately, because this enterprise made the bold leap to Azure, they aren't just keeping the lights on anymore. They are perfectly positioned for the next frontier. They are ready to embrace SAP Rise. They can start utilizing artificial intelligence to predict system bottlenecks before they happen. They can implement FinOps to actively optimize their cloud spend, use infrastructure as code via Terraform to instantly deploy new test environments, and even practice green computing by spinning down resources when they just aren't needed.
We've seen an incredible journey today. 5,000 users moving from the constraints of legacy hardware to the absolute limitless potential of the cloud. It's a huge testament to the power of Azure and modern SAP architecture working together. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to take away from this explainer. With AI, automation, and FinOps entirely reshaping the SAP landscape, is your infrastructure ready to rise to the occasion? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep building for the future.